So I think it's time to get started. For today, there will not be any actual content about algorithms. We'll talk mostly about how the module is organized. And I have a little sneak attack planned on you, but we'll come to that. So welcome again. I'm Sebastian. I like name tags because then you don't have to remember names, and I'm terrible with names. I'll try my best, but you're a big group. I'll probably only keep a few, but so that you can remember mine. We have another person who's not here today, Ben Smith, one of my PhD students, who's doing the tutorials. They will start next week, as you can see in your timetable. You will be split in 3 groups, and the timetabling team has somehow assigned you. I have no control over this. And Ben will be in touch over Campuswire how things are organized next week. We originally were thinking whether we do some of the tutorials as online ones and others face-to-face. But now the rules seem, the planning seems to go fine that we can be on campus, so maybe this is easier than we thought. But yeah, Ben will be in touch. Nothing this week, as it is on the timetable. The tutorials start next week. All right, there's a website for the module that I guess you will have seen. I announced it 5 times in the Canvas announcement, and there's the syllabus page on Canvas that links to it. If you haven't stumbled across it until now, here it is. For most things that you want to know about the module, you want to go to that website, and it has links to all the other things. We'll use a few other things. I will talk about this later. I just thought it's useful to have a complete list on the slide somewhere. So Campuswire is the one where you have to sign up, which, well, most of you have done, I think, by now, or a few are late to it, but I'll check that out. And you can use the back channel on Slido if you want to reach me during class. Now, I'm not sure if I will be able to manage this as well as during the remote versions. So this is what Slido looks like. It's a little cut off on the left, but I think you can see that the class feed is where you can post questions, or where I post or Ben posts announcements. And if you go to rooms, there's a lecture back channel. I tried to add everyone that was here. And well, you can use this, and I'll try to react to it if I see it. I'm juggling devices now. It's gonna be a challenge. But the idea is also, if you feel you have something you want to discuss or want to ask, I want to give you options to reach me without necessarily raising your hand. It's totally fine if you have a question to wave or just start screaming. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can use Slido and post a question there, or you can use Campuswire, where you can post anonymously in the lecture back channel. OK. I will say some more about how Campuswire will be used. And then we have Slido, as you have seen already, just for quick pulse in class. And of course, you will be interested in the assessments. We'll talk about that in detail. I copied the percentages from the pandemic mode, where we tried as a department to have less weight on the final exams, both because there was a time when we weren't sure if these were happening. Now they were doing fine online last year, but also it's tougher for many reasons. So you're kind of the lucky cohort that still has the rules from last year, where everything was completely mayhem, while we're in almost normal circumstances on campus, at least. So the exam will be less heavy in terms of the weight for the mark, and the other continuous assessments, I think, are quite doable. You put some effort in, so they're more plannable, say, than the exam. Well, that's what it is. I decided I'll keep it. Honestly, I was planning that half of this would be online because infection numbers didn't look good a few weeks ago. But here we are, so that's positive. All right, let's do a little Slido question to get you guys awake. And so 500 clicks, and I have to switch the question as well. So here's the question. This is, if you could decide and the circumstances don't really matter, how would you prefer to be taught in a setup like this? So a module of roughly this size, a lecture hall like this, which is fairly crowded, and I listed different options. It's basically out of curiosity. I asked the same question last year when we were fully online, and I asked it later again during the term, but I'm very curious what you think. I'll give you a minute for this because I think it takes a moment to just read all the options. One thing about Slido that will come up later, I want to give a little participation mark for this class just to make it a little more likely that you vote on Slido. And it's easy earned marks. It's just 5%, but it's a bit. And so for checking that, it's important that you give me an email address on Slido when you sign up that I can identify with your account on Canvas. So if you use the university address, that should be fine. That plus your name should make it unique enough. But if you want to make my life easy, which is always a good idea, then use the sign up name that you use on Canvas, the same user account that you use to log into the Windows machines. Okay, I think there's a few more people still working on this. I'll let you continue voting, but I want to briefly have a look at the results here already. You should be able to see it on your device. Maybe it's more readable than here. So we have a preference for standard lectures in roughly the style that we're doing it here, followed by smaller groups, seminar-style lectures with more interaction. Yeah, a little further off than the synchronous online versions. And anything asynchronous comes last. I wonder if that is what you experienced last term. I think this is very natural, though. Even if you hadn't experienced it, I tried to. I'll come back to this on the slides. So maybe let me switch back to this. I want to briefly talk about my approach to lectures. I also tried to take MOOCs, these massive open online courses, in the past a lot, just for learning about things I wanted to learn. And it's really, really hard to keep up motivation if you're just watching videos. Now, our lectures here are a bit more. You have the videos plus some tutorials and things going on, and some Q&A maybe, which was live, whether it's on campus or not. But still, it's really hard to follow, to stay on track if it's just asynchronous events. And so, yeah, I think in either way, it's just much easier to stay on top of things if things are synchronous and you have a fixed rhythm that you're forced externally to adhere to. I think it's just human that this is easier for most of us. All right, what else do I want to say about lectures? I mean, pretty much independent of how you deliver a lecture. It's always easier if you explain things well, give intuitions, and structure things well. I tried my best. We'll try to have synchronous live events with some interaction, which is just a psychological trick to keep you awake, but also has other benefits in terms of learning. And it helps me to see if I'm getting at anything. But recordings are really useful for rehearsing. That's another experience that I've made. So I'll try to do this live stream because, well, maybe frankly because it sounded fun to try it, but also because I think it's realistic to assume that at some point, some of you will be isolating because of some restrictions, or you will be sick in a home. And it's a bummer if you can't participate at all from that. And also the recordings itself, apart from the live stream, are much easier to make without all the setup. And they're just convenient to look back at what was actually said in class so that you know what's covered in the exam, for example. I've been teaching for quite a few years now, and it's great to have in-class conversations. Unfortunately, or just fact of life, it's only something that a small group feels comfortable with. And I think this is not a bad thing. That's just how life is. And some students prefer to engage in lectures, and others just don't want to. And instead of lamenting over this, I try to offer you different back channels, like questions on Slido that I think the moderation can be turned off now. So you can play with it if you want. If you open Slido, there's next to the polls, there's also a questions tab where you can type in a question. And well, I'll have to keep an eye on my phone to see them, but I'll try to. And if they flash up, I'll bring them up. We can discuss it. And you can post anonymously if that's if you prefer. And lastly, interaction is just important for many reasons. Staying awake is the least important, but it is an effective one. And just it makes concepts stick more easily if there's some interaction going and you're just not in Netflix mode. All right. So as a consequence of that, these are the things that comprise this module. There's lectures, obviously, which is not very surprising, and Slido questions that I talked about a lot. They're complemented by the tutorials, where you will have some extra tasks that the intention is that you work on those before you go to the tutorials, and then Ben will discuss solutions with you. But the time in the tutorials is not that long, so if you come completely unprepared, you won't take as much from it as possible. There will be sample solutions posted, so if you're just curious how the answer would be for that, that's fine. But you should give it a go first and try to write down a solution, or at least sketch some solution. That's how you get the most out of the tutorials. But that said, I know you have enough deadlines, so I don't want to enforce this. It's voluntary in that sense. We're not checking it. But it's super encouraged just because it's effective. It's been proven many times. But yeah, no deadlines from that, just the recommendation. Spanning across everything is Campuswire as the main communication platform, unless we're here in class. And we'll try to use this to post questions, which not only I am answering, but you are answering for the others. It's one of the, yeah, I'll come back to it, why I think this is the right way to do it. Then the rest below here is parts of the assessments. What I didn't put on the slide is the exam, because every lecture has an exam, so nothing really new, nothing really surprising. You want a degree with a mark on it, or with a grade, and so we need exams. They're not the fun part of the course, but well. The other assessments can be a bit more fun. The first one we'll do is a video presentation. So I'll get you to read and present an article from Communications of the ACM. We'll talk about that later a bit. This is done in groups. So the idea here is it's a little orthogonal to the main module, which is more theoretically about algorithms. And this is on the other end of the spectrum. It's more understanding some algorithms or some concepts that are on the research side of computer science and communicating those in an engaging way. We'll have some class tests, which are just small Canvas quizzes. You can think of them like the Slido polls, just a little more challenging. So you have to actually think and work and use a piece of scrap paper to work out the answer. These are usually testing the understanding of some detail that we cover in class. And I'll give an example in class, and then it sounds really clear. And when you're forced to do it yourself, you notice if it is actually clear. So that's what the class tests are for. But there will be a practice version before you have to take the real one. So I think these are really easy to prepare. So it's clear what will be asked for. And then we'll have 2 programming puzzles, which are, they involve a little bit of programming, but not very much. They're mostly thinking about an algorithmic puzzle, but the submission is in terms of code. So if you're not really an expert software developer, don't panic. You will probably write a dozen lines of simple Python code, or Java if you prefer. I think we have both. The challenge is before you start coding, really. But yeah, these have always been fun. Students usually like those. A quick overview in terms of the content. So what's the goal of this module? I want to equip you with some basic toolbox for working with mostly text and strings. That's what we'll focus on. We'll focus on methods that are fast in practice, which means in terms of running time, they're near linear in the input. And in many applications, anything that's slower is not really usable because the data is too big. Secondary to, I mean, the first bullet is essentially saying, here's a list of things that the smartest people of the last so and so many decades have come up with. It would be good if you would know these before you go out and use them on your job. But there's more to it. I think the more important part is give you vocabulary to talk about computer science solutions and algorithmic solutions. Programming libraries and other programs or other products are usually described in the language that we talk about in this module. So if you understand these basics well, even if you're not re-implementing, say, a binary search tree or suffix trees on your job ever, because there's good libraries, hopefully, for doing that, knowing these concepts, knowing them well, knowing how they're used, what are the limitations, that makes you a professional in this field. And that's almost as important as being able to write them and use them, is being able to communicate confidently about those. I'll also give you a little bit of the picture of how you prove algorithms correct and how you analyze them. We won't stress very much on it, but you'll also learn the vocabulary there to communicate what does that mean, that an algorithm is provably correct, or what is worst case complexity in these things. And the last one is a bit more practical. You will often not find an application where there's exactly one matching thing in your toolbox and that solves the problem. You will have to combine and slightly play with existing solutions. And you need the first 2 parts to be able to do that. I structured the module into these 10 units, where the first is really a kind of a dummy unit. That's why it's unit 0. Most of you will have seen what I'm covering there, and the current unit, the current set deck of slides is just about the admin part. Then we'll talk about abstract models of computation. That separates proper algorithm theory from just implementing something and testing if it works. And then we'll work our way up through several applications, all revolving around string data, sequence data, and always focusing on the algorithms that are fast and effective in practice. We'll start with some fairly basic things, because one of the challenges of this module is you're a very diverse cohort. Maybe you don't know, but you will find out, or we'll discuss it next time. There's people on the Advanced Computer Science Master who have done an undergrad in computer science, either with us or somewhere else. And then there's also people, maybe what's the opposite end of the spectrum? Maybe the new data science master, which is open to a very broad range of undergrads who might never have programmed apart from term one, or might never have seen mathematical proofs apart from term one. This is a huge spectrum. And there's a few things that some of the computer science undergrads will have seen already in these two units, and maybe this one, but only parts of it, and we'll extend it a good bit. But yeah, so I apologize if there's a few sections that might be boring to those, but we'll go through them fairly quickly, and I'll give you, if you haven't seen those, some additional material where you can dig a bit deeper into those. So I'm trying to bridge this by going from the beginning, basically introducing everything we need in this class, but the pace in some of these units will be quite quick. Especially for the time where Unit 2 is scheduled, I hope you don't have too much going on in that week. If you haven't seen binary search trees and priority queues ever before, these are things that normally are introduced over the course of 3 weeks, maybe, and we'll have to cover it in 1 week. It's a bit of a tough ride if you haven't seen it. On the other hand, there's nothing in this module that really builds on it, not in a strict way. So I just included here because I think these are gems of computer science, and you have to know about those if you want a CS degree, but they're not really as vital to pass this module per se. So that's my compromise. It's not perfect for either of the groups. I'm aware of that. And we're trying to restructure some of the modules for the future, but it's taking its time. And I think the compromise is still viable. More details on the assessments. Here's the breakdown of what the final mark consists of. I mentioned already half of it is the final exam. Then there's these 10% each for the video presentation and the 2 programming puzzles that I spoke about earlier. 15% is the class tests, and these will be throughout the term. I think I'll stick to this format. So we have 1 practice question where you can see the exact type of question you will be asked in the actual class test, but just for playing. And then there will be a fresh one of the same type, but of course with new parameters, which is marked. And that's just a Canvas quiz. So these are fairly quick to do, maybe half an hour. And we'll do a handful of those spread out over the term. If you want to think of it as taking some of the weight from the exam and spreading it out over the term, I think it's generally a good idea to do it. And it was possible during the pandemic. And we'll go back to normal next year, but for this one, we're in the sweet spot. There's a participation mark, which is 5% just for regularly participating on Slido. Not for getting questions correct if there is a correct answer, but for casting your vote and thinking about it, keeping engaged there. That's just a little goodie to make you appreciate that. And then there will be some bonus points. Now, this is a little more tricky because I tried to find a sophisticated set of rules that make this engaging, but also not too unfair. So the bonus points will be collective. By asking questions on Campuswire, well, good and reasonable questions on Campuswire, that's my catch here. They have to be approved by Ben or me. Or answers, you will earn bonus points. But these are earned for everyone, for the entire class, no matter who asks or answers the question. And then we'll give a boost to the class test mark for everyone. Another encouragement just to use Campuswire in this way. I think it's really effective to do it, but sometimes you need a little external nudge. And so there's your nudge, some bonus points for this. This slide's again about Slido, but I think I talked a lot about Slido already. They're also sometimes called clickers. because there used to be hardware devices that made a little click if you press them. I think no one's using them anymore because, okay, the American tradition was you just force the students to buy one, otherwise they can't pass their courses. And so it was a great deal for the manufacturers of these devices. And apart from that, I think the hardware clickers were not good for anything. The phone apps are much more versatile. So we'll use Slido instead, as you already practiced. And the idea is to have you stay awake, give quick feedback for you to see if you're on track, and give feedback to me if the majority of you is on track for other types of questions. We'll come to that. Okay, shall we practice this one more time? Next question is just if you've used this. I'm trying to sprinkle these in to keep you awake, you notice. And the goal is to answer them as quickly as possible. You guys are fast. Wow. Okay, having the laptops on the table in front of you helps, I guess. I didn't pay attention for the last question. How many people are we? Should be, I think registered is over 80. But usually there's some back and forth in the first few weeks where people switch modules. And I think this room would be full to the last spot if it was over 80. $52. Okay, I would be curious to discuss this more, where you have used those, etc. But I think we don't have the time for that today. Yeah, thanks for participating on this. I hope you found them effective in the past. And if not, there's still the bonus participation mark. Okay. Campuswire also I already showed you briefly. The two main features we're using. I mentioned this because Campuswire has other features, but I tried to disable them. You can also use it for live video lectures and things. If you look at their website, they're pretty cool. But for this setup, we'll use the class feed where you can post questions and answer other people's questions. And we use the chat rooms instead of Teams, basically. I think many modules use a Teams team. What Campuswire offers on top of Teams is that you can post anonymously. And that's sometimes very useful. For the chat, maybe not so much. But for asking questions, if you feel this might be a dumb question, maybe firing it anonymously is less of a hurdle. And I want to tear down all the hurdles I can. So here's the link you can join again. And you can the same link with P is for participate, for joining. And if you replace it with a C for class or so, then you get to the sign in. There's also a nice mobile app. Yeah, most of you found this already. So a few more details about this Q&A feature. Just some examples to inspire you. If during class or after, at any point, you have some question, or from the tutorials, some questions are triggered where you're not sure why this is the case, but you feel, well, whatever you'll do, I'll probably redirect your questions to Campuswire, because almost always, it's not just you who has this question. 5 other people have the same question. And there might be 5 other people who had the same question but figured it out. And for them, it's really helpful if they can give you the answer. It also saves me the time to type the answer, but that's the minor point. Unless you flood us with questions, which usually doesn't happen. But it's really effective to pick up other people's questions, think about it, and if you can answer it, type it along. What we'll do is we will flag answers. I forgot how it's called on Campuswire. There's a feature where you can, as an instructor, Ben and I can click on a question, say this is a good question, and we can say this is a good answer. So you will see if the answer is kind of approved, has the official stamp. or we'll augment the answer and correct it or extend it. So there's nothing really to stop you from answering other people's questions. Just go ahead. And you can ask. You can also ask private questions. If you start a post on Campuswire, you can select if this is visible to everyone or private. I think the only reason why you would want to use a private question is if this is about an assessment and you feel you have figured out half of it and now you have a question for the second part or so. And if this would kind of reveal the answer or part of it to the others, then maybe a private question is better. And I think I can still make it public, or you can make it public. If we decide this is not a spoiler, we can still publish it after the fact. All right. Yeah, I suppose Campuswire is intuitive enough to use, so we'll just give it a go. I'm not sure how well we'll separate. There's this Canvas as well where you can post announcements, where I can post announcements. I'll use Canvas for the very official ones, the ones where I want to be 100% sure that everyone gets them who is enrolled. Whereas Campuswire, I can't really force you to join. I'm encouraging you, but I think for anything that's legal, like information about the exam or things like that, I will post it on Canvas. And for smaller things like, oh, I posted the new slides, I will use Campuswire, which is a bit, so keeps the Canvas notifications a bit more standing out because there are fewer of them. So very important things on Canvas, and the daily kind of flurry of updates on Campuswire. Maybe goes without saying, but a bit of netiquette. The goals for Campuswire from our side is, apart from the obvious things I stated, it's fairer because everyone sees the same answer. It's kind of an obvious point, but I like it very much. It encourages you to learn by teaching, and well, it's inclusive in that it offers a different way of engaging. I will redirect your questions to Campuswire whenever it's feasible, whenever it's something that might also be interesting for others. And second point is important. Even if you post a very legit question that is really challenging, I'll try to keep my hands off and not answer it right away, and instead give other students a chance to answer it for me, to support this second point, obviously. And yeah, I mentioned we'll mark the answers so that you know. And here's the bonus point breakdown. Not very important maybe, but the thing is, an answer that's marked as good is more important than the questions, just because this is very effective. And for every 100 points you earn together, you'll get 1 extra mark on the class test mark at the end. Yeah, this is always terrible bookkeeping for me. There's a dire day at the end of the term where I have to do the tallies. But we'll get through it. Okay, we're almost done. I know this is a little, and another slide on another thing. I'll try to keep this short because we might talk about this in 2 weeks' time again in more detail. I already said the first continuous assessment is this video presentation. And the goal is to get you reading some actual research literature, but we'll pick Communications of the ACM, this journal. Do you guys know the ACM? Was it Association for Computing Machinery, or it's a bit of a old-fashioned term maybe, but I mean it's the biggest computer scientists association, the US-American one. Hope that didn't damage it. Shouldn't play with it. Ah. Thank God nothing happened. That's why they put the distance between the podium and the students, is to protect you. I'll put this down. No, I can't. I have to have something in my hand. So ACM, you know about the ACM. They have a journal basically a periodical magazine more than a scientific journal, but they also have some research articles in there. And I ask you to pick something from there because it's at the right level. It's written for a very broad audience, so anyone with a CS degree should be able to understand it, and you're just at the corner of getting there. And at the same time, it's quite prestigious, so they have interesting and good articles, well-written articles, and on current topics. You find the deadlines on Canvas, which is also where you will form groups on Canvas. I'll show this when we are there. I noticed in the past that the first 2 weeks, it often happens that students still move modules around. And so I will not try to assign any groups in the first 2 weeks, because we've had in the past couple of times that then some groups got people removed from because they stopped the module. So we'll hold this off for a moment. But if you want, you can already think about whom you want to pair up with and what article might be interesting. If you download the slides from the module website, this is a clickable link which gets you to the journal website, but you can also Google it. All right, enough of that. The final deadline for this is 28th of March, so some time to go, but I wanted to put it on this slide already. If you have any questions about these things as we discuss them, use Slido or Scream or use any of the other back channels. I'll try to keep an eye on them. This is the last little thing I want to mention, and then I want you to get active. That's my sneak attack. But I want this to stand out a little bit because it overarches some of the other things. COMP526 is part of a scientific course. So it's not only to train you to become good software developers, or not only to make you good data scientists or insurance brokers or whatever you might go into after finishing this. So I prefer it would be less like this guy who just types along and doesn't really learn anything, and a bit more like this. So maybe I should read out the second comic where there's a bit more text. It starts like, the world's so complicated, the more I learn, the less clear anything gets. There are too many ideas and arguments to pick and choose from. How can I trust myself to know the truth about anything? And if everything I know is so shaky, what on earth am I doing teaching? I guess you just do your best. No one can impart perfect universal truths to their students, except math teachers. Thank you. So we're not doing math, but we're doing theoretical computer science that has relevance to practice. So we're straddling a bit both worlds. But I want definitely to include some universal truths of algorithms in this module. So we'll not just look at, here's Java code and it seems to work, and well, if it doesn't, and if it does, we'll try to prove that things work, and we'll try to get an understanding why they do so. And that means we'll try to have a clear model of what is making up our matters, our objects, the machines and the programs and the data. And we'll talk about this in next week, I guess, in much more detail. And we'll try to make quantitative predictions. It's a bit like a civil engineer. It doesn't just start building a bridge, and then if it collapses, they try to build it slightly differently. They try to predict up front if this is going to work out. Computer science and programming, we're in the convenient situation that we can often just try it out, and if it fails, we modify it, and we keep unit testing, etc., until it works. And that's often effective, just because it's so fast, and then no one's damaged if the bridge collapses, if your first attempt to implement something doesn't work out. So that's fine, but for the important big questions, you're designing a big system and you want to predict, is this algorithmic approach or this architecture good enough? You don't want to implement that 9 months and then find out, oh gosh, we should have done something entirely differently and now we're screwed and the project will be over budget and over time and I'll be fired. Instead, you want to have some way of predicting things. Now, this is quite tough. To be honest, I think mostly computer science is not at the point to predict exactly whether the bridge will last or will be efficient enough. But we can get to some degree of that. And then a little bit something that you'll explore maybe more in the continuous assessments is we'll try to validate if our predictions are also true in some applications. That's less of a focus in this module, but we'll touch a little bit on it. Now, I hope you're excited about the universal truths part, because this also means this is knowledge that doesn't age so quickly. Whereas the fastest way to sort 1 million integers in Java on Pentium 4 or whatever, that ages quite quickly. Whereas the fundamental idea of what makes sorting algorithms fast usually survives much longer. The downside of these universal truths is if we want models and predictions, we need somehow the machinery for that, which involves some mathematical techniques. So that's what we'll cover in the second part of this week. But before we do that, I'd like to do a little test with you. Now, I don't want you to panic, so that's why this guy's here. It's a survey, and it's called a prior knowledge survey, not a prerequisite survey. It's not things that I think you should know or I even expect you could know. It's things that might be useful, and it's just interesting for me to know whether you know that. I hope that distinction is clear. And to stress that point, it's not graded, it's anonymous. It's a formative assessment, which is a fancy way of saying it's an assessment that tells you and tells me how things are going, and it's helping you to see clear, but it's not about assessing what you've already learned, which would be fairly pointless in the first lecture. The questions cover quite a few different topics, and some of them are really nasty in the sense that you have to scratch your head twice and maybe write down something on a piece of paper. What I would like you to do is give it a sincere try, and I'm not planning on doing anything else for the rest of today's session. So we have another 45 minutes roughly, or 40 minutes, which is probably ample to finish it. But also you won't be much faster, because quite a few questions, and I want you to give it a fair attempt. So try to solve it on your own as much as you can. Remember, it doesn't matter at all if you solve it correctly. It's more about getting a feeling where we are. Lots of the things we don't need actually for this class. I put them in because they're interesting for me to know. And if you want, the main idea, the main goal of this is to see if I can speed up or slow down on certain things, because every one of you knows already topic X, then I don't have to spend much time on it.